The morning came without light. Frost crackled in the stove. Thin ice webbing where I'd spilled water the night before. My breath hung steady in the air. Every surface in the hut wore a skin of white. Kettle, axe head latch. The door refused to open. I leaned my weight, and the packed snow broke loose with a short crack. Cold rolled in fast and complete. Outside, drifts climbed halfway up the wall. I cleared a path with the shovel. Slow, even strokes. The mare waited by the shed, frost around her muzzle. I brushed her coat and set hay near the trough. From the forest came a faint snap. Wood or something moving. Then silence again. Inside, I fed the stove fresh wood until the flame steadied. The heat barely reached my gloves. I drank a mouthful of melted snow, fastened my coat, and stepped out toward the creek. The hut sat at the edge of a narrow valley, its windows half buried in snow. Beyond the door, birch trunks stood in perfect rows, pale and silent. The hills behind them looked carved from glass. The air stayed blue and heavy, the kind that never warms even when the sun climbs. I started the morning work. The woodpile was sealed under ice. I split through the crust until the clean grain showed. The axe rang once and the sound died fast. I stacked the pieces by the stove, brushed frost from my sleeves, and watched the thin flame try to hold. The walls still breathed cold. Outside, the mare shifted in her pen, uneasy. I poured warm water into her trough. Steam rose, then vanished. Somewhere down the valley came a faint crack. Not wind, something weighty, distant. She turned her head toward it, then went still. I checked her harness, brushed ice from the straps, and moved on. The traps hung stiff on the shed wall. I chose 3, tied them to the sled with rope frozen solid. My hands worked slow inside the mittens. The sun hung low and colorless. I packed a pouch of food, marked the time by its weak light, and looked once more toward the trees before heading out. The sled tracks froze solid behind me as I followed the creek. The air was clear and flat. No wind, only the dry crunch under my boots. I moved between birches toward the traps buried along the bank. The first 2 were empty. The third was half locked in ice. I knelt, chipped it loose with the back of the axe, steady blows. Not too hard. My breath fogged the scarf, freezing there in thin gray patches when I straightened. I saw the prints, broad, deep, still sharp-edged, a moose alone, close. The stride cut across mine toward the tree line. I followed the marks with my eyes until they vanished uphill. The mare behind me stood rigid, ears toward the forest. I checked the rifle bolt. It dragged half-frozen. The metal gleamed dull in the light. I tightened the strap, pulled the sled line, and kept moving. The sky had turned the color of iron. The valley narrowed, trees closing in until their branches scraped the sled cover. The snow there was untouched except for the single trail that cut through its center. The prints were deep and sharp-edged, the kind that hold their shape when the cold is dry. I followed them, slow and quiet, each breath a thin ribbon of frost. The mare walked behind me, head low, hooves sinking with a soft crunch. I could hear her lungs working, steady and slow. The rest of the forest gave nothing back, no sound, no movement. Only the faint hiss of frost falling from branches. After a time, the trees opened into a clearing. The ground was hard-packed and pale, a few dry willows poking through the snow. I stopped behind a stump, let the rope rest against my leg, and scanned the edge of the trees. At first, I saw nothing. Then, between 2 trunks, something shifted. A mass of dark fur, slow and deliberate. The moose stood broadside. Half turned, its coat caked with ice. Steam rose from its nostrils and hung in the still air. It stood there, listening, large enough to seem part of the landscape. I stayed down on one knee. The rifle held close. The metal clung to my glove. I eased it free, tried the bolt. It stuck halfway. The oil had stiffened again. I cupped my hand around the chamber, breathing warmth into it. When I looked back, the moose had turned its head. One ear flicked toward me. The wind changed then, a small shift across my cheek. The mare gave a low grunt, rope pulling tight. The moose lifted its head higher. I didn't move. The cold pressed harder, waiting for what would come next. The moose stepped once, then lunged forward. Snow burst under its hooves, a deep pounding that rolled through the ground. I brought the rifle up, forced the bolt, but it jammed halfway. The animal was already coming. I dropped it and moved aside, boots sliding on the hard crust. The first pass swept close enough that the air pushed at my coat. I felt the ground tremble as it passed. Heard the sharp crack of hooves on frozen snow. It wheeled fast, throwing powder into the air, head low, breath pouring from its mouth in clouds. My hand found the axe. The strap caught on the buckle. I tore it free with my teeth, the leather stiff and cold against my face. The next charge came straight. I braced my feet, lifted the axe, and swung as it passed. The blade met the shoulder with a heavy thud, metal biting through hair and hide before stopping against bone. The shock traveled through the handle into my wrists. The moose stumbled, turned halfway, and came again. I backed away, slipped once, caught myself, and waited. Its steps slowed, uneven now. Blood steamed on its coat in thin threads. It took another step, then dropped to its knees. I stood still, axe raised, breath ragged in the mask of my scarf. The animal's sides moved once, then stopped. The sound of its weight settling into the snow was the only thing left. I lowered the axe. The wood handle damp with frost and sweat. The air had gone completely still. Not even the mare moved behind me. I listened for another breath that never came. Then I stepped closer, slow, making sure it was done. I waited until the steam stopped rising from its muzzle. Then I moved in, testing for breath. The snow beneath was dark and already freezing over. I set the axe down, straightened the legs, and began to work. The hide was stiff, thick as felt, turning hard as soon as the air touched it. The mare stood a few paces off, uneasy. I spoke to her in a low voice. She settled, ears twitching, and I tied her near a birch. The sled creaked as I tightened the rope. The sound brittle and dry, I worked by order. Hide first, then quarters, then ribs. The knife dulled fast against frozen tissue. I stopped twice to sharpen it, the stone scraping loud in the cold. Each cut sent a trace of steam upward before it froze again. The meat went onto the sled in neat stacks, covered with canvas. By dusk, the air burned in my throat. The trail home was clear. At the hut, I fed thin wood to the stove until the flame held, then cooked a small piece over the pan. The smell of smoke and iron filled the room. Before sleeping, I went out once more, brushed ice from the mare's mane, and checked the latch. The door had started to freeze again.